Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. But of course, before we get started, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. I should also mention, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, go ahead and do that now. We're sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, looking to get to 5,000 by the end of the 2026 baseball season. And before we get into our Mets conversation, I do want to apologize for not being here with you yesterday as planned, as scheduled. I was feeling a bit under the weather, and quite frankly, I thought maybe I could tough out a show, but I think that toughing out a show sometimes isn't the best thing to do. You'd rather do the show when you're feeling good, when you're feeling like you can be totally engaged and completely invested in what you're doing. And quite frankly, physically, I just wasn't feeling up to it. Stomach was bothering me. In case you're wondering, I feel a lot better today, and that's why we are here rocking with all of you right now. And that means that we have a lot to talk about, because when you miss a daily show, you have to kind of catch back up on everything. And when that daily show comes on the heels of the trade deadline, it means you have even more to talk about. So instead of starting with the Mets game from last night, we'll talk about the trade deadline recap. Now, look, at this point, you've had the opportunity to go through the entire list of players that the Mets traded, players that the Mets acquired. You've had people who know prospects around Major League Baseball and know Mets prospects, quite frankly, better than I do, to deep dive on each and every single one of them. So we'll do a little bit of a quicker overview, a recap of the entirety of the Mets trade deadline, if you will. All in all, like the headline says, the Mets deal 9 players off of their Major League roster, or I should say 8 players off of their Major League roster, plus 1 from their minor league system, and they acquire 13 prospects in return. Look, there's a lot of things that you can make out of this deadline for the New York Mets. A lot of people have said the deadline was underwhelming. A lot of people are mad at David Stearns, so no matter what he does, they're going to be upset. They're going to be pissed off. It is what it is. Look, the bottom line is, when you are selling players off at the deadline, it's hard to figure out right now in this moment whether or not a team, quote unquote, succeeded or not, because we're not going to know who some of these players are until 2027, until 2028, maybe even beyond that. Maybe even the Mets don't have some of these prospects by the time the offseason rolls around, by the time next season rolls around. Maybe they're used in deals and we wait even longer to find out what their contributions at the major league level are. So to be quite frank with all of you, I don't know if it's fair to try to gauge and try to grade for all of us how this deadline went, because when you're selling off players and you're acquiring prospects, you're just simply acquiring the best players you can while maximizing the value. So when you look at the Luke Weaver trade and you say, oh, the Mets kicked in money and the Mets only got 1 prospect back, how could they? He was so valuable. Well, clearly he wasn't. Because if he was more valuable, the Mets would have gotten more. And I know that's easy to sit here and say, and some of you want to poo-poo that and say, again, because you hate David Stearns, that he overplayed his hand or whatever the case may be. But oftentimes I'll say, you can't judge a player, like at any point, you can't complain that your team didn't acquire a player who wasn't actually traded, right? If you go to the offseason, you go to the deadline and you're a buyer, it doesn't matter if it's baseball, basketball, football, whatever. You can't get mad that your team didn't acquire a player that ended up not being traded, because you don't know really what happened in that situation. And I'll apply some of that logic to this situation. You can't say that the Mets could have gotten more because they didn't. And we're not in those conversations, so we don't know. So in my very humble opinion, I say the Mets did well. I'll say the Mets did about as well as you can expect. And the Mets objectively added a lot of talent. When you add 13 prospects to your minor league system, that's a lot of talent. Now, with some of these guys, and we talked about this on a show a couple days ago, it seems like they circled, this player has 1 tool. And we'll either try to build around that tool and make them a more complete player, or we'll try to take that 1 tool and rocket ship it to the moon so that we can absolutely maximize on this player's value. Now, with a couple of these deals, the Mets went more well-rounded, and the Mets did come out of this with 1, according to some articles and some publications, 1 top 100 prospect, in Jeffrey Rojas. Now, some of these other prospects, they might shoot up the boards after the trade deadline dust fully settles and all of these publications start to redo their, kind of mid-season rankings or post-trade deadline rankings. Some of these publications might come up with their, off-season rankings, and then again, the Mets might see some helium behind some of these guys. So yes, they didn't get a ton of top 100 prospects as it stands right now, but things can change very quickly in the minor league system. I mean, you look at the Mets, they graduate a couple players in the offseason, start of this season. They trade off a couple players from the deadline and in the offseason, and all of a sudden the Mets go from having what is perceived to be one of the best systems in baseball to a very mediocre system. And that's because they graduated a lot of players, and then people in the minors had either down years, injury-riddled years, or both. So, when you look at this, again, the Mets did, I think, as best as they could possibly have done. And we'll run through the names really quickly. On the way out, Freddie Peralta, Luke Weaver, Clay Holmes, Tyrone Taylor, David Peterson from a few weeks ago, AJ Minter from earlier in the week, Brooks Raley, Huascar Brazovan, and Ben Rortvedt. So they get these guys off their roster. And with Ben Rortvedt, you have to remember he was in the minor leagues with the Mets. The Dodgers needed a catcher. They had him in their system last year, so they go ahead and they trade him for Chase McDermott. So it's a little bit of a swap. You help us, we'll help you. It's kind of a mediocre swap, but it is what it is. And alongside Chase McDermott, the Mets bring in the aforementioned, I said Jeffrey Rojas, it was Jefferson Rojas, Sammy Strafora, Cole Mathis, Aiden Smith, Gabe Davis, Billy Amick, Gary Gill-Hill, Petrie, Spikerman, Agbayani, Franklin, and Gabrish. So you've got some unranked players. You've got some good players from good farm systems in this mix. But the two that I want to highlight are Jefferson Rojas and Sammy Strafora, because according to Joe DeMaio, who just released his rankings yesterday, his new top 10 for the New York Mets in their system, you're looking at the number 1 ranked prospect in Jefferson Rojas and the number 3 ranked prospect in Sammy Strafora. So these are two major ads by the New York Mets. Both shortstop prospects. Looks like Jefferson Rojas plays all over the infield, shortstop, second base, third base. Future is probably as a third baseman if he sticks in one spot. He might be a guy who moves around a little bit, but I don't think he's going to be a shortstop. Whereas Strafora, not only did he grow up a Mets fan, a huge diehard Mets fan from Westchester, but he is a guy who is toolsy as hell, athletic as hell, really good on defense, and is a guy who can stick at shortstop. He's also a guy who's seen this massive power surge over this season, but really over the last month or so. He had like 14 home runs in July. So when you look at just those two pieces and you look at the state of the Mets middle infield and just infield at large in the minor leagues, those are two massive ads by the New York Mets. And then when you look at guys like Petrie, you look at guys like Gill-Hill, and some folks that really can make an impact as soon as 2027, along with Jefferson Rojas, I think you start to see that the Mets have put themselves in a really good position. And then look, on the flip side of things, when you see where this team is now for the rest of 2026, and we saw it last night in the game, you're going to see some new faces at the MLB level, right? Dediel Nunez back off of Tommy John rehab. He was promoted to the major league team. Jeffrey Yan promoted to the major league team, who's an exciting left-handed pitcher, throws really hard, has a lot of just, does a lot of crazy things, jumping around on the mound and all that fun stuff. And then we saw the debut of Nate Lavender, who looked really impressive. So look, if you're somebody who's looking for a reason to watch the New York Mets, right now it's Carson Bench, it's AJ Ewing. On the days they pitch, it's Nolan McLean, Zach Thornton, Christian Scott. When Soto gets back, it'll be Soto. You mix him in with Lindor, you mix him in with Bichette, of course. But then some of these younger guys, too, they're going to have the opportunity to prove themselves. And look, Nate Lavender was great last night. So you get Nate Lavender out there. You can have Jeffrey Yan. You can have Dediel Nunez. At some point, I'm sure you'll see maybe Dylan Ross and some of these other young guys come up and get an opportunity in the bullpen or in the rotation or whatever the case may be. So I think all in all, again, the Mets did well at the trading deadline, about as well as could be expected. And when you look at what to watch here in 2026, they've added a couple reasons for you to watch if you're a diehard baseball fan, which if you're watching Mets Daily, I know that you are. So let's get right into the game from last night. Not a ton to talk about in general, but, they play loose, as the headline says. The Mets came out and they played without pressure, seemingly, for the first time all season. Of course, the Mets, the day of the trading deadline, don't have a game. So this is the first opportunity where they've got some new faces and expectations are off this team, and they can stop pressing and they can stop squeezing the bat so tight and all of this stuff. So you know what? They come out, they play loose, they play a nice game, and they win the game pretty easily, all things considered. Sean Manaea, he gets into some trouble, he gets out of some trouble, but when you look up, he's hitting 95 on the gun. He's got an ERA in the mid-threes over his last 15 starts. He pitches 6 innings. He puts them in a position to win. They go on. They win the game. Boom, boom. They turn a bunch of double plays. They look a lot more fluid in the field. They're taking a lot better at bats overall as a team. The Mets look good, and they walk away with a win here. And that's something that, look, I know a lot of people want to get this top 6 pick or whatever it is, and I understand the importance of that, so the Mets don't get penalized because of the luxury tax and all of this stuff. And look, would that be a positive for the Mets to get a pick that's somewhat protected and, to have more draft capital to spend? Yeah, that would be great. So I'm not going to be upset in a lost season if the Mets wind up in that spot. And honestly, their record is so bad that they could probably go on a little bit of a run and find themselves in that spot anyway. So that being said, I'm never going to root for this team to lose. I don't have it in me. And if you want to do that, that's your prerogative, but you're not going to find me on this podcast 5 days a week rooting for the Mets to lose. So I like a game like last night because last night's game was fun. It was interesting. It was entertaining, and I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed listening to it. And again, we've said that too few times here in 2026. And speaking of, this is a quick digression. Speaking of enjoying listening to the game, shout out to Laura Albanese, who had to jump into duty for the first time in her life, doing color commentary on the radio alongside Keith Rad, who is absolutely terrific at his job. Of course, Howie Rose doesn't travel anymore in his final year with the New York Mets, as a everyday voice on the radio. So it's usually Keith Rad and Pat McCarthy. And unfortunately, Pat McCarthy had a death in the family, and our condolences go out to him and his family. But last minute, he couldn't make it. Laura Albanese jumps into the booth. She's a beat writer for the New York Mets. She does a great job at that. And I listened to probably about 3 innings of this game on the radio because I was in my car. I watched a little bit of it. I was listening to a little bit of it. And I thought she was great. I thought she was fun. I thought she was entertaining. And it was great to hear. So shout out to Laura Albanese for jumping in and doing a job that I think is a lot of people's dream jobs, right? Calling a baseball game on the radio. So good for her. She's going to be on the call for the next 2 days as well. And like I said, I thought she did great. And looking forward to hearing more of it. I've worked with her at the Queens Baseball Convention. She's good people, and she's great at her job. So nice to see her get this opportunity. And like I said, I'm going to continue to listen over the next couple of days. That being said, baseball season is here, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. And I'm going to go with a simple one here because I'm going to try to keep it simple for all of you folks, because why not? Sometimes you dig deep, try to find an interesting one, but I just like this one. The Mets to win tonight, trading at 52%. Christian Scott's on the mound. I like the vibes off of the game last night. I like Christian Scott against the Guardians team that cannot score, period. So at 52%, $100 will get you $186, and I like that value. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning that there is no house, and as the probability changes, you can buy into and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app, use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything. Must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. And that brings me to the star performer of the night in last night's win, none other than Luis Torrens. Mets deploying a strategy that I think we'll see a lot of down the stretch, especially while Juan Soto is out. And that is going to Francisco Alvarez in the DH and Luis Torrens behind the dish. Luis Torrens had himself a game. Luis Torrens, we know, is a great defensive catcher, but he goes 3 for 3, adds a walk, so he's on base 4 times. He's got 4 RBI, so responsible for 4 of the 6 runs with our New York Mets, including an opposite field 3-run home run. Now, we know home runs are not a big part of Torrens' game, but he definitely did his thing with regards to hitting that ball out in a big-time clutch situation. And we've seen Luis Torrens be clutch going the other way. And every once in a while, with his approach to go the other way, he squares it up and he sneaks it over the wall out in right field. And that's exactly what he did after an error kept the inning going. A walk put the next guy on. Luis Torrens leaves the yard. So great game for Torrens, who's going to be here with the Mets for the foreseeable future. And that brings me to the topic I wanted to discuss. It is a good thing that the Mets decided to keep both catchers. According to reports, and this is reliable reporting because a lot of it comes from Will Salmon, who is the best, the Mets were asking for a team's top prospect plus more in any conversation they were having about Francisco Alvarez. What does that tell you? It tells you that the Mets didn't want to trade Francisco Alvarez, which is what I said they shouldn't. I said they shouldn't trade him, and I said they shouldn't want to trade him. And it shows you that they would listen, but if the ask is very high, guys, that means that they did not want to trade Francisco Alvarez. So you would have to knock their socks off in order for them to agree to a deal. Of course, no teams agreed to that deal, and so Francisco Alvarez stays with the New York Mets. But there were other reports that said teams asked, okay, well, what about Luis Torrens? And the Mets said, no, Luis Torrens is off the table. So when you look at this catching tandem with a lot of control for Francisco Alvarez, and he's only 24 years old, and he's got the power potential, and he's got the massive offensive threat potential, you look at this guy and you say, good, Mets are holding on to him. That makes sense. Mets are trying to have some continuity. That makes sense. But then you look at the tandem that they have developed with him and Luis Torrens. Luis Torrens is, if he's not the best defensive catcher in baseball, he's not far off. Guy's got a great arm, calls a great game, plays great defense behind the dish. And he does the kind of thing that you saw tonight. You can get him out there in spots. You can put him out there for a few games in a row or a week at a time. He can get hot. He can do some things offensively. Now, I've said on the show before, and I stand by it, he's not a great offensive player. And a lot of Mets fans overrate him and they underrate Alvarez, and it is what it is, and I'm never going to change their minds. However, he is a productive player as a total package. And when you pair these two guys together, it is an excellent catching tandem, and it is one the Mets should not break up right now. I'm glad they didn't break up at the deadline. It is one that the Mets should not break up in the offseason. The Mets have a lot of question marks heading into a 2027 that they're trying to compete in. There is no question marks in the outfield. There is no question marks behind the plate. There's a lot of question marks on the infield now. There's a lot of question marks in the starting rotation. And now that they've made a lot of these deals out of the bullpen, most notably Huáscar Brazoban and Luke Weaver, two guys who could have been here next season. They were under team control for next season. They've got questions in the bullpen. So if you have questions in the bullpen, you have questions in the rotation, you have questions on the infield. I don't think you need to create another area of questions. Keep your catching tandem with Francisco Alvarez and Luis Torrens. Despite what some Met fans may tell you, and despite what some Met fans think, it's good. It's one of the best around the league. Keep them together. I'm glad they did, and this was a good example of that. To close out the show, this is a topic I was going to talk about anyway, but I didn't know we were going to get to see it in the first game. So shout out to Ryan Finkelstein, who said on his show that he thought the Mets should change Kodai Senga into a late inning leverage reliever and see what he's got. I listened to his show, and then a couple hours later, I see on Twitter that Andy Green said in his press availability that the Mets are going to make Kodai Senga a late inning leverage reliever who goes 1 inning. And I was like, damn, that's cool. Because I agreed with the take that Ryan had. And then when I heard it from Andy Green, I was like, I agree with that. And then we got to see it immediately. The Mets have a 4-run lead, so it's not a save situation. So why go to Devin Williams? Kodai Senga is well-rested. Go to Kodai Senga. Now, if you've listened to the show for a while, you know I've got a bit of disdain for Kodai Senga. I've called him soft. I said everything has to be perfect. I wanted him off the team. I've called for him to be DFA'd. And honestly, I still feel that way. I think the Mets might be better off if Kodai Senga wasn't on their roster. But no one wants to take Kodai Senga off your hands because he makes a lot of money for a guy whose ERA was 9 at one point this season. I mean, he pitched well tonight and he lowered his ERA to 8.47. That's not good. But I'll say this. This is a smart move for the New York Mets. But like the headline says at the bottom, it's also Kodai Senga's last chance. The Mets are trying to squeeze every ounce of usefulness out of Kodai Senga. And if it's not going to be in the starting rotation, and it's not going to be as a reliever who can come in and give you multiple innings, this is the last shot. Now, here's what's smart about this. There's two things. One, Kodai Senga is going to make like $15 million next year, which if he is an effective leverage relief pitcher, that's high, but it's not insane. The other part of it is he's a guy who profiles well as a late inning leverage pitcher because he's got 2+ pitches. He's got a fastball that if he's pitching in short spurts plays way up, and we've seen that all season. He's a guy who can throw 98, 99 if he's going to just let it all hang out for one inning. And the ghost fork, when it's on, is still one of the most effective pitches in Major League Baseball. It's like an 80 grade pitch. He gets tons of whiffs. You don't have to worry about mixing in a cutter, mixing in a changeup, being able to save bullets on your fastball. Can you locate this way? Can you locate that way? You said, Kodai, go out there, throw as hard as you can for one inning and mix in that ghost fork. And if he spots that fastball at 97, 98, 99, and then comes with the ghost fork, I think he can actually be effective doing this. So again, I don't want to go back on what I've been saying. I think the Mets would be better served, perhaps, without him on their roster. But I understand the thought process of paying somebody to just go away when you haven't exhausted every avenue. And I would have done this sooner if I were them, but they were masquerading as a team that, you know, at some point was still trying to win games, and you have to say that before the deadline so you don't give up leverage and all that stuff. Now that the deadline is passed, you're going to get 2 months to watch this. And if it works and some team says, hey, we'll take him off your hands, cool. And if it works and he becomes an asset for you in the bullpen, I don't know how realistic it is. I don't know. I don't know if he can go on, say, back-to-back days. So I don't know if he can pitch, 2 out of 3 days. I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered stuff here. So I don't want to jump the gun, even though he pitched 1 inning, closed out the game, only gave up 1 base runner on a walk. There's a lot to still be figured out here, but I don't think it's the most ridiculous thing to try to figure out if you could salvage any value for this guy who at $15 million can pitch in the 8th inning for you. I think that would be pretty good value considering how much his value and his ability level has dipped. So I like this move from the Mets. I think it's smart. Might as well try it now. I'm a little surprised that they tried it right out of the gate, but I guess the game situation called for it. I think if this was a save situation, you're just going to go to Devin Williams. You're going to go to your guy. But the 1 extra run made it, hey, you know what? It's technically not a save situation. We don't have to get Devin in this game. Give Devin a little bit of rest. We'll see what Kodai Senga's got. And what Kodai Senga got was pretty good. And we'll see if that continues. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I know the trade deadline is passed, but we've got plenty more to discuss. Things like this, the fun, the interesting, the weird. Kodai Senga, Nate Lavender, shout out him, who had a great game as well. So we got a lot of stuff we could talk about over the course of the next few months of the Major League Baseball season. Who knows? Maybe we'll sprinkle in some fun, weird, outside the box, off the field stuff too. We'll see what we'll get into. Anyway, I'm John Saponaro. Until next time, see you tomorrow.